in the country today even, but when Long Wharf was originally built, it was almost half a mile long. You look at Long Wharf now and you say, David, not a chance, that's just a couple hundred yards. Why are you making stuff up? Well, I'm not. In fact, and that brings me to my second theme, which is the amount of man-made land there is around the city of Boston. This, by far and away, will be the most extraordinary thing you learn on this tour. So really pick it up at the beginning so you know what I'm talking about later on. Boston was founded way back in 1630 on what was called the Shawmut Peninsula. We all know what a peninsula is, a little spit of land sticking out into a huge body of water. Well, that peninsula was very rocky, very hilly, not so good for farming, the wharfing out of Boston, sticking to our theme of the obvious. So we'll keep coming back to that. But right now, take a look off to the right, that rusty iron bridge. Everything to the right of the bridge is Boston. Everything to the left of it, South Boston. But everything down the middle of it is Fort Point Channel, home to Griffin's Wharf, the very site of the Boston Tea Party, where on the night of December 16th, 1773, the colonists came down. They boarded 3 ships, the Eleanor, the Dartmouth, and the Beaver. The captain of the Beaver, in fact, was an ancestor of mine, Captain Hezekiah Coffin. What a cool name for an ancestor. I'll stick with David. But they boarded those 3 ships, all the while proclaiming no taxation without representation. Listen to the anger still in your voices. Boy, do we know how to hold a grudge. And then, of course, 92,000 pounds of tea went over the side into the harbor. 92,000 pounds of something that weighs nothing. That's a lot of tea. And, of course, created one of many sparks of the American Revolution and proved that we don't know how to make tea here in Boston. Apparently, brand spanking new, and here we are in the reflection of that building. That's you on a boat. That's a selfie without your forearm in the picture. What is that? Oh, Mississippi. You completely missed it. Oh, you did. Zoom in, see if you can find yourself. We're all looking for ourselves these days. It's okay. Now that building and the 2 buildings behind it, brand spanking new, less than 8 years old, and they replaced what was once known as the top grossing restaurant on the nation. Now those 3 buildings, they sit on what's called Pier 4, even though it's not a pier, it's a wharf. We'll talk about that again later. But the 3 buildings, that restaurant they replaced was owned by a guy named Anthony. It sat on Pier 4, it was a restaurant. So what was it called? Anthony's Pier 4 Restaurant, sticking to my first theme. Now, Anthony had a great marketing idea. He offered all the cab drivers in Boston a free lunch, so that when you got into a cab and asked for that restaurant recommendation, as we for some reason do, because we all know cab drivers know the best restaurants, right? Well, the response was always this in Connecticut, which is why you can understand every word I say. Yes, he said that out loud. All right, here's the South Boston Fish Pier. Also, a wharf, not a pier, and I will talk about that later. But you'll see some fishing boats rafted up on this side. These boats, they're called stern draggers, for the very obvious reason. They drag the fish off the stern of the boat. They have these huge nets, they unfurl them behind the boat, drag them through the water, and so that's time I'll never get back. But anything for my passengers, you know. So a great place to buy music in the summer months, so things are a little chilly over there in the wintertime. And violent facts get in the way of that dad joke, right? Dad first. Take a look at my favorite sculpture here on the harbor, this 45-foot sculpture of a codfish right here on this building, celebrating the history of the cod. The cod, once the mainstay of the economy, often referred to as the great cod. Today the cod is either overfished or overregulated. Very different responses to get according to who you ask, the government regulators or the fishermen. 2 groups of people you'll never see having a beer together, that's for sure. But a very interesting story by Mark Romanti called Still, this is South Boston, Southeast if you live here. And that long white building back there, you can't even see built in because it's so long. In fact, it's so long, in 1910, they finished building it. It was the longest building in the world. For 3 whole months. But that doesn't diminish that it was a record, right? It's still a record. Here we go. Now, I talked about all this man-made land. Let's become a little bit more familiar with that. Recognize man-made land. One, the easy way, just take my word for it. 2, see the rock retaining wall along the shoreline. And that's all we're going to see on this tour along the shoreline is rock retaining walls and already mislabeled wharves and piers. It's going to be really, really flat, right? I mean, why on earth would you build a hill? That's a lot of extra work. More importantly, it's a lot of extra dirt. And remembering that 75% of Boston sits on dirt that had to come from somewhere, you're not going to waste that dirt building hills. So right about here, you're noticing there's nothing really interesting. Celebrating, of course, our independence from the evil British Empire. And it sits on what we still call today Castle Island. This was an island off the coast of Boston. From this fort here, all the way back to the tall buildings, man-made land. This was literally an island off the coast. South Boston used to be known as South Bay. It simply wasn't here. It was all part of the harbor. Now, the last British troops were stationed out here during the siege of Boston back in 1775. And from Long Wharf, where we all departed from in joy and anticipation of a halfway decent tour at least, that's where the last British troops were evacuated out of Boston on March 17, 1776, in shame, humiliation, and defeat. Slightly different departure than we had. Now, that is still celebrated as a holiday here in Boston. If you are a city employee, that's an official day off. If you just have a pulse, that's also a day off, because that's St. Patrick's Day. And in Boston, it was so dirty, in fact, that you had a job out here, you actually needed a tetanus shot to have that job. That's how bad it was. As sadly, you're all going to learn. But today, of course, the harbor is now one of the cleanest harbors in the country, subject I'm quite passionate about, as I spend all year on the water, half the year in the water, and it's having a transformational effect on the city as we speak. And it's why we all get to be here. So we'll start with the island behind us now. That island with the round circles of land, connected in the middle by a little sandbar. It actually looked like a pair of eyeglasses. Now, we were British subjects when we named the island, so what do they call eyeglasses in England? Anyone want to speculate on this one? Did you say? I'll tell you in a minute. There's a plane coming for the back of your heads. Just wanted to give you a heads up, you know. All right, they're a little high. You're going to be okay. Remain calm. The gazebo on the top of the hill. I have a non-compete clause with the airport. I'm so sick of losing. So the gazebo marks the spot where once there was a bulldozer. It was pushing the trash across the hill. It sank into the trash and was never seen again. That was the end of dumping trash out there. Obviously, there was no more room. So they lost the dozer. They did save the driver. And then someone took a look around and realized, wow, this is really disgusting. Look what we've done. We should clean this up. So what do you think they did to clean up all of that trash? Anybody want to toss out a guess? That's exactly what they did. They burned it. So they decided to turn that into a public park. Here's how they did it. They covered it all over with dirt. Now we're back to talking dirt again. And actually it gets pretty interesting because there were no more hills. Where did that dirt come from? No more hills. We took all the hills. So half a block away from where each and every one of us got onto this boat, there used to be an elevated double-decker highway. Ran right smack through the middle of downtown Boston. It's called the Central Artery. Scary, dirty, gross, and dangerous. They took that entire highway system down and they put it in a tunnel under the city of Boston that they dug specifically for that highway. It's 1.5 miles long. It's 10. Roof was if you had a window seat. Otherwise, you would have been underneath the roof entering Boston. Underneath that roof is by far and away the worst view of it. That is a unique color paint, folks. That was designed in a lab in Switzerland. It changes color red throughout the course of the day, depending on which angle the sun hits it. But you can only really appreciate that if you work on a boat. So yeah, I get to appreciate that all day long. Now, I just thought they'd call it neutral red because they designed it in Switzerland, but they had a more specific color in mind. What color red is that, folks, here in Boston? Don't try to get creative. My favorite color red, however, is right here on the Nantucket Lightship. This was the largest of 3 floating lighthouses stationed around the island of Nantucket, located off the coast of Cape Cod, once the whaling capital of the world, but surrounded by 90 miles of shallow waters, the Nantucket Shoals. They reach way out into the international shipping lanes, and as an aid to navigation, before all the electronics we have these days, they put these floating lighthouses out there. Sailors, as you can well imagine, had a fair amount of free time on a boat going nowhere, so to pass the time they took up the hobby of basket weaving. And of course, these became known the world over as the Nantucket Lightship baskets. An original one of those baskets today worth a little over $30,000. Check your attic when you get home. It's about 2 months college tuition right there. This is going to be interesting. Little sailboats coming across. 110 feet of steel. There's good judgment. Look at that. This is the Pierce Park Sailing Center, where you can get to learn how to sail a boat. Great pastime here in the windy city of Boston. Now look behind these sailboats. You see that spaceship-like structure there? That sits on a wharf. A wharf is built on granite blocks around the perimeter, filled in the middle with earth, rocks, and gravel, and they'll last forever. So that's a wharf. A pier, like the one appearing before us now, built on wood pilings. And as you can see, they don't last as long. That one's getting ready to disappear. They don't last very long. Wood sitting in salt water, you know. In between these two piers, take a look at the little houses back there. I call that dirty harbor construction. That's when they were built. When the harbor was really dirty, they're set back away from that dirty water. The windows are really small, so you wouldn't have to look at that dirty water. And you would definitely not want to open those windows, or you would smell that dirty water. But from here on forward, everything is brand spanking new. This is what happens when you clean up the harbor. This pier here, completely revitalized over the past few years. In the warm summer months, especially on the weekend, and frankly, neither do I. But they're having fun. And of course, this tall ship here, called the tall ship, keeping that simple, that's a floating oyster bar. It doesn't go anywhere. It is the destination, and a very popular one at that. It is also the only tall ship in the world with 10 flat-screen TVs, keeping that traditional and all. Now these condominiums here, I watched them build every single one of these condos over the past 8 years from this very boat during these tours. You know what I watched them build before the condos? The land. This is the most recently built land on the harbor. You want to clean up a harbor on the waterfront, you're going to put up more land. Everything gets abbreviated. But look along the shoreline, as promised, rock retaining walls. And that tall building up ahead on the right, on the corner of East Boston, says Live Eddie at the top. I'll be honest with you, I don't know who Eddie is. Eddie is apparently doing very well, though. I think that's fair to say. The building, more importantly, sits on land formerly known as Noddle's Island. And Noddle's Island is the original landmass that has now become East Boston. Freshwater rivers. The first one off to the right, yep, right under that monstrosity of a bridge. That is the Mystic Tobin Bridge. Tobin for the governor who wanted it built, Mystic for the river it spans. The Mystic River, originally named by the Native Americans the Mistalk River. Someone apparently mistook the Mistalk for the Mystic. It was a mistake. I'm so dumb. Sometimes we can't help ourselves. That's the longest bridge in New England, folks. 2.5 miles long. Primarily a land bridge. You can't see most of it. But that's 1/2 mile longer than the Golden Gate Bridge. Who saw that coming? I will concede the point, it is not 1/2 mile prettier. And what color green? What color green is that here in Boston? That is not Boston green. It's for a very specific location in Boston. Anybody got this? Struck by a kamikaze pilot. But as she's decommissioned, no longer under the charge of the Navy, nope, now she's under the charge of what's left of the National Park Service. Up on the hill, that is the Bunker Hill Monument, proudly standing, of course, on Breed's Hill. Battle of Bunker Hill took place on Breed's Hill simply because the colonists couldn't read the map. So they landed on the wrong hill. There they were, defending some random hill. The Redcoats came along, saw us defending it, decided, well, they're defending it, it must be important, let's take it, boys. And they took it, only on the third try, though, because we were running so low on ammunition. This is where we learned that phrase, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes. The eyes have it. We lost that battle. That's a monument to a loss. Think about that for a minute. Not a lot of those in this country. Well, not here in the north. I love having Mississippi right next to me when I say that. Just the facts, just the facts. God, I hate this job. Anyway, because we do have a sense of humor here in Boston. But a lot of people think the monument looks like the Washington Monument, right? It's actually the other way around. This was built 42 years before the Washington Monument. Now that beautiful ship there, the pride and joy of Boston Harbor, that is the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned warship afloat in the world. She earned her undying fame and, of course, her famous nickname in the War of 1812 when she encountered the HMS Guerriere, which we are all noticing rhymes with the word derriere, which in fact was the last warship we saw as it sank beneath the waves, cannonballs bouncing harmlessly off the sides of the Constitution. Some excitable seaman was heard to say, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron!" Which, of course, they're not. They're made of 22-inch thick Georgia live oak, but strong enough wood to repel or stick any cannonball of the day. I say stick because at the end of that battle, there were 19 cannonballs stuck in